Hello, and welcome to the Giving Back to Gwinnett podcast. Each episode, we tackle community issues, tell stories that matter, and show how you can make a difference. Presented by the Gwinnett Coalition and the Community Foundation for Northeast Georgia, Giving Back to Gwinnett showcases the nonprofits and people making an impact in Gwinnett. I'm Heather Loveridge, founder of Magnolia Media Group and chief storyteller for the Community Foundation, and I'm your host. Did you know that more than 1 in 4 children have been exposed to at least one adverse event in their lives? Here in Georgia, 18% of children have experienced at least one adverse event, and 10% have experienced 2 or more. You might be wondering, what exactly is an adverse event? Well, joining us in studio today are 3 guests who will explain what our children are experiencing and young adults are experiencing, and how Georgia and Gwinnett are working to build resilient communities. So welcome to Emily Ann Val, Executive Director of Resilient Georgia, Jessica Andrews Wilson, Gwinnett Coalition Board Member and Executive Director of GUIDE, and Dr. Tanisha Parker, Gwinnett County Public Schools Department of Student Services. Thanks for being with us today. So let's dive right into this issue and what our listeners need to know. So to start with, let's define what is an adverse event, first of all, and then what do our parents, caregivers, teachers, anyone coming in contact with kids, teens, young adults need to know about what they're experiencing with these adverse events. So Emily Ann, I'm going to toss it to you first then. And Dr. Parker, you can chime in, Jessica, chime in as we're trying to explain what an adverse event is.
Absolutely. So I'll start by saying we often refer to adverse events as adverse childhood events, and the acronym we use quite often is ACEs, or our ACEs. And with those, it basically means that it's a potentially traumatic event in a child's life. So it can be anything from parental divorce to a parent having an addiction or an addiction living in the home with the child. It can be witnessing domestic abuse. It can be an incarcerated parent. Any of those would all be included.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Parker, anything you want to add to that?
No, I like the fact that you use the word potentially when you just potentially traumatic when you explained it, because of that term resilience. So many of our students respond to events in their lives in different ways, and some events that are traumatic for some students, other students have a resiliency level that allows them to not have negative consequences that display in some of your traditional observations, academics, behaviors. Not to say that they don't need support, but I do like that word potential, because we do see some resiliency traits in some students, and we just are in awe of how they're able to progress and move forward given the situations and experiences that they've had.
Right. Well, and then let's talk about parents, caregivers, anyone who's coming in contact. What do they need to know about these adverse childhood events? I'm going to toss it over to Dr. Parker.
Okay. I would say that we need to be aware as a community that these events have the potential to really interrupt development, personal and social development, academic development, self-awareness. These events, because they are traumatic, and some students respond to that in a number of ways, closing down, shutting down, or acting out, or just completely cutting themselves off from support systems. We need to be aware that these are signs, and we need to support our students in a variety of ways. And we need to kind of dig a little and put in networks and safety nets to catch those kids that may not be responding or showing signs that we traditionally look for, but still may need help. Some of our most resilient kids are struggling internally and silently, and we want to make sure we're putting safety nets there to support them as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for the insight in there. Jessica, anything to add from your end as we're talking about, what these are and what, caregivers, adults need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what Dr. Parker just said is so important about just recognizing the adults in young people's lives, recognizing that these can have impacts and have long-lasting impacts. And I also think it's important for the people who are not, who are the adults in a young person's life who are not in their home, to recognize how these different adverse events or experiences can add up, so that what they might see at school, for instance, feels like an overreaction to a bad grade or not making the team, or something that seems minor to them, but there's all this baggage that they're carrying with them because they brought that from home. Maybe they're experiencing some of those things that Emily Ann mentioned. A divorce is happening, there's addiction in their home. And so one of the things that we really try to make sure that people, specifically who are teachers and counselors and youth workers, after school staff, people like that who are engaged with young people, realize is that it's not just what happens within the walls of that school. Mm-hmm. It's not just what happens within that after school program, that our young people have all of this other stuff that they've got that they're carrying, and all of that adds up. And so being really mindful of that, so that they can respond appropriately if they do start to see some of those warning signs, or they do start to see that what is an inappropriate reaction because it was a relatively minor thing in school or in the program that happened, but the young person's response is a major response, and that they can respond appropriately to get them the right supports that they need.
Right. That's key. Understanding that what you see on the surface is not always what is happening behind the scenes. So, Emily Ann, let's share a little bit about Resilient Georgia program and just what you want our listeners to know about that.
Absolutely. So Resilient Georgia, we just turned 2 in April, and our 2 founders are from the philanthropic community. And with that perspective, they were seeing a lot of efforts and asks coming across their desk that maybe weren't aligned, and different subject matter experts in different sectors that were doing some of this work weren't always talking to each other. So they saw the need for a backbone organization. So that's what Resilient Georgia is. We are framed in collective impact, and our end goal is to create an integrated behavioral health care system for the state by making Georgia a trauma-informed state. So we intend to do that by bolstering our public and private partnerships across the state in all different sectors, having as many diverse partners come to the table as we possibly can. We focus our work on 3 pillars. One is to celebrate the work that's already being done in Georgia. Another is to break down barriers, whether micro, macro, whether it's large policy, legislation, or just making introductions. And then the third is to connect and convene whenever we can. So really get folks talking and meeting. To date, we have over 700 stakeholders at the table, which we're very proud of. And we ask any listeners, or both of you, all 3 of you, well, Jessica, I talk to you all the time, but both of you, we'd love for you to join our efforts too. If you want to ever log onto our website, you'll be included on all of our invites. And of course, there's lots of information on our website.
Are there any stats that people would be surprised to know about the issue when we're talking about adverse childhood events? I think it's not necessarily a stat, but since I've been in this role and talking about this content, it's always interesting to me when you discuss it with somebody that's never had this conversation or learned about this work before, that ACEs and adverse childhood events affect everyone. You referenced some statistics when you opened the show, but it's not just the children that experience them. It's all those caretakers that also care for the child. I don't think any of us don't know someone in our families or our close friends that have been through these things. So that's kind of what I keep in the back of my mind when we're talking about this work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important designation, is the thing to think about. And so we know we've got work being done on the state level, which is very important work and helping people become aware. So let's talk a little bit about what's being done right here in Gwinnett. So Jessica, share about the coalition's launch of Resilient Gwinnett and kind of what's happening there.
So I am, as you said at the start, a board member for the Gwinnett Coalition, and was thrilled to be able to partner with Renee Bird-Lewis, the CEO there, to pull together an application several months ago, and in the spring to kick off this focus in Gwinnett of kind of looking at where are we in terms of being a trauma-informed community. What do we have going on already as it relates to the issues around ACEs and mental health and promotion of strategies to improve mental health and to protect our young people and to really insulate them. You know, when you think about what Emily Ann just said about how we've all had these things, we've all experienced these things in our lives, and what can make the difference is the bubble wrap that we sort of have around us. You know, that idea of protective factors, of that resiliency. And so what Resilient Gwinnett is all about is about giving our community members more of those tools, more of that bubble wrap to protect themselves, to protect those young people that they come into contact with or that they serve or they teach on a regular basis, so that those young people are better able to bounce back, that they're more equipped to handle those traumatic experiences that come their way, because we know we can't eliminate those in young people's lives. There's certainly things we can do to cut down on them, but we know we can't eliminate and protect every child and every young person from ever experiencing trauma. But what we can do is equip the young people and the adults who are around them with the right tools, the right strategies, the right access to resources and the supports that they might need, so that when they are impacted by those things, when they do have that experience in their life, that they know how to respond. They have the right tools, whether that be mindfulness and meditation and kind of searching within themselves and finding their own sense of peace, or finding the right counselor or therapist who can help them process that situation. So Resilient Gwinnett's focus has really started with just gathering our partners, seeing who in the community wants to be a part of this, seeing who already is doing this work, who's already connected and engaged in all of this and interested in this, and just kind of bringing people in. And that's where we started this spring. People can join the Resilient Gwinnett work at any time by going to resilientgwinnett.org, and there's a place to sign up there. As Emily Ann said, if you sign up with Resilient Gwinnett, you'll get all of our invites, you'll get our newsletters, you'll find out about what's being offered. And what's starting to be offered right now, what the coalition is doing right now, is we have started offering free community trainings. And these are, we're offering both in-person and virtual opportunities, and they're on a variety of different evidence-based programs that just train parents, teachers, community members, whoever is interested in them, in some different aspects of what does trauma-informed mean, how do we do this work, how do we protect people. We have everything from QPR, which is a suicide prevention training that really speaks to how do we recognize if somebody might be considering suicide and how do we respond appropriately to it, to a training called Connections Matter that is really designed to emphasize how we can build caring connections with young people that really help to prevent some of this lifelong trauma from having an impact. So there's all kinds of opportunities that Resilient Gwinnett is offering, from just kind of being a part of our list and hearing what's going on to coming to our training, to bringing us in. We will come in for free to community organizations, to businesses, faith organizations, to do some of these trainings as well, because our initial goal is really just to get the word out, to get our community educated about what does this mean and how do we do something about it. And
I like that you mentioned lifelong impact too. This is an area I've actually done some educating myself over the past few years, and even realizing that something you experience as a child, you may not have processed it, but then as an adult you start struggling and you don't understand, but then you realize that whether it's physical issues, because your body can keep all that stress and that negative effects, and that can manifest itself as, all of a sudden you're like, I'm struggling with my health, and tracing that back. So kind of along those lines, group discussion, let's talk about, you mentioned the tools and getting needed training, but why is that so important? Because people might think, well, Resilient Georgia has it handled. Gwinnett County Public Schools has it handled. Resilient Gwinnett has it handled. But why do people listening need to know this, need to have the tools themselves as much as possible? So open to Dr. Parker.
I would say it is critically important for our whole community to be educated. I think some of the work that needs to be done, there are different levels of support that's needed. So when you're talking about counseling or therapy, you're talking about a specialized level of support. And when you're working with students that have had traumatic experiences in their lives, at some point and sometimes that support is needed. But oftentimes, that level of support is not necessarily what's needed. It can be trained to any caring adult, and any caring adult can support a student with self-awareness, with self-management, with responsible decision-making skills, and learning how to build relationships and just social awareness so that they can learn to navigate the environments in which they are. I really liked the bubble wrap scenario that she just spoke about, and I've always used the term safety net, but I like bubble wrap too. I think I'm going to bring that in. But part of what this education for a community does is helps reduce the amount of traumatic events that can occur in these environmental areas that we don't necessarily have control over. So when you ask, what are we doing? How are we supporting? I think we're looking beyond just the student in our classroom and understanding there's a whole ecosystem around that kid. There's a whole environment around that kid that needs to be supported as well. And while the school can't do it alone, what the school and the district can do is strategically partner with those organizations in the community that can support in other areas. For example, we know our homeless students are experiencing traumatic events on a very regular basis, not knowing where they're going to be from day to day, observing their parents in very distressed situations and with that affect. So while we can support the student when we have the student in our classroom, what we really want to do is help that family get out of that situation. Now, the school doesn't have housing or job training, but we can partner with organizations that do that, so that when we recognize or have a family that comes to us that is homeless or struggling with something, whatever that something is, we've been able to be on the front side of strategizing and partnering with organizations like the Gwinnett Coalition for a crisis hotline where we can call when our parents and families say they're out of food, they're out of work, they've been put out. We've networked and communicated with one of our local hotel agencies so that we can have emergency housing for these emergency situations while we try to help this family figure out what their next steps will be. So it's not only the support that happens in the classroom, it's also that support that happens outside of the classroom. And for the community to be aware of this is an important thing, because they know then, based on what you do in your everyday work, how you can be a part of the solution and how you can be a part of the support. You may not be sitting down with the student in front of you helping them on a specific resiliency skill, but what you may have is job training that you can offer to families and help provide some stability. And that's needed, because those are the environments and those are the situations that create those adverse child experiences that we want to avoid.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Parker. Emily Ann, anything to add?
Well, I'll kind of align with what Dr. Parker said, in that it's important to think about prevention, and that's kind of what she said is, it's a lot easier to act early, and we've already discussed that, ACEs and adverse childhood experiences, they can affect you for a lifetime. If we're proactive and not reactive, it's in everybody's best interests. I think that also kind of speaks to why we should bolster and build community awareness.
Right. Well, Dr. Parker, going back to you, since you're on the front line, so to speak, with our students, every week, 5 days a week. So what have you seen over the past years? We're talking about ACE, adverse childhood events, and the impact you've seen.
Well, for the past 10 years, and this is even before COVID and before some of, societal, social issues were really on the front stage, we saw an uptick in students needing mental support, mental health support, and mental wellness support. COVID and our social unrest has really just exacerbated that. But it's also pulled on some of the resources and networks that our students have traditionally had available to them. Sometimes their families have historically and traditionally been that network and that resource for them to gain strength and support. But our families are so stressed and tapped out right now. Parents that used to be very engaged may find themselves looking for jobs or looking for new employment or new homes, and just trying to live in this different environment. So they are not as available, not because they don't want to be, but because the situations that we're currently living in right now are pulling on so many of their resources that they have fewer to give their students, their children. So what we see are the impact of that on our kids. Our kids are so needy right now. They want attention, they want affirmation, they want to know it's going to be okay. And a lot of the adult faces, when they look around, look very concerned and very worried, rightfully so. So we have to figure out how to communicate to our kids to let them know, yes, these are challenging times, but the adults in your life are working really hard to make things better. What we need you to do is work really hard on doing all of the things that you need to do to be the best you. And you let the adults handle all of the adult stuff. A lot of our kids want to take on the burdens of their parents, because as much as we love our kids love their parents, and they love the adults around them that care for them, and they want to carry those adult burdens, and it's not for them to carry. So we need to do a better job of making sure they don't feel like they need to shoulder that. But they are very stressed. They are longing for a new and a better day, and it's our job as the adults to figure out how to make that happen for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like a big task sometimes, I'm sure, but a doable one with everyone joining forces. So talking about that, Dr. Parker, how do you see Resilient Gwinnett making an impact in this area, in the past short amount of time that we have launched that? What have you seen?
I absolutely think there's opportunity for Resilient Gwinnett to make a significant impact, not only in the state of Georgia, but in Gwinnett County specifically. When we work on critical life skills for our students, those life skills are for them to be resilient. And I've mentioned some of them before: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness. We want to make sure our kids have those skills on board, so when something happens, they're not always looking outside of themselves for the solution. Sometimes the solution definitely is within, particularly if you have skills built up. So if you see something on social media that says you're not this or that, that doesn't crush you, because you know who you are. You can affirm yourself. Us adults in the building are going to affirm you too, but when kids have that within them, it cuts out a lot of the noise that impacts their development, their academic success, just their progress. So I do see opportunities for Resilient Gwinnett in the state of Georgia, as well as in Gwinnett County, and working with us as we work to build up those critical skills in our students to ultimately build up their resiliency.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Emily Ann, and then Jessica, I'll toss this over to you too as well. So let's talk about some of the long-term implications. We've touched on some of them, and the importance of taking care of kids now. But if we don't address this from even talking about our workforce issues and things like that, what are some of these long-term implications?
Absolutely. If you grow up with a lot of adverse childhood experiences, you can have increased chronic diseases. You're more at risk for mental illness. You're more at risk for dependency issues. And like Dr. Parker said, you can offset those. Connections and all of the support systems she mentions can offset those, but lifetime issues will occur if you have a lot of them and they're untreated and you don't have those support systems in place. When I first started, there's quizzes you can take. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them, but if you Google it, it pops up real quick on the CDC website or others. And when I first took this role, I took the ACEs quiz, and I thought, oh, I have about 10 years left. I better get busy because, if it's a little scary. And one of the things that we want to promote is, just because you grow up and with a lot of these things going on, or you're working with children that have, 4, 5, 8 ACEs, it's not a deal breaker. You can be that one supportive adult in their lives, and it doesn't have to impact their entire livelihood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can not reverse course, but you can help change the direction they're heading. Yeah, Jessica, what would you add to that?
I think that we can't forget that some of one of the worst things that we can see happen when we're not addressing this is that we see our young people considering suicide. And the Georgia Student Health Survey is a survey that high school students across the state take every year. And the most recent data shows us that in Gwinnett, 5.5% of Gwinnett middle school students and about the same percentage, 5.4% of Gwinnett high school students said that they had attempted suicide at least once in the previous 12 months.
Wow.
And that's when you think about how many students are in our Gwinnett County schools, that about 11% of them between middle school and high school said that they had attempted suicide. It's unacceptable. That is absolutely an issue that we have to address. And we know that a lot of that is attributed to not being equipped to deal with the things that are coming at them, not having the right supports in place. And so as much as I think it's important for us to talk about, and our work often focuses on the positive of what good is going to come out of this work that we're doing. I think it is we also need to look at what happens if we don't address this. And we're seeing, especially with the impacts of the pandemic on young people and the isolation and the challenges of digital learning and the economic impacts so much, that every kid now has an ACE, because every kid is living through a pandemic right now. And that is something that if they don't have the right supports in place, could snowball, could add to that number of ACEs that they have. And so I think that, really realizing that these aren't just get over it kid kinds of things. These are things that really can have those implications that put the thoughts in a young person's head that this just isn't worth it. And so I think that, really realizing that that's why we have to do this work, because it's not just about, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I lived through these same kinds of things. They can do that too. We've got to start addressing them, or there really are dire life-ending consequences for our young people.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so because we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of understanding what's happening with our kids, our high school students and so on. Let's talk a little bit about, kind of the positive impacts that we've seen so far. Understanding that Resilient Georgia is still young, Resilient Gwinnett is still young. But, Emily Ann, what positive impacts have you already seen through these initiatives? And then Jessica, I'll, toss it over to you as well.
So many things. I kind of don't know where to start. We've seen, we often talk about big P and little p. So big policy, little policy. We've seen all kinds of great work happening across the state. Right now, just for context, we're in 97 counties across the state. By the end of the year, we'll be in between 120 and 121. We're working on that. And, some regions, and we use the term region because due to population density, when we work with a metro area coalition, the region is a county, like, of course, Resilient Gwinnett. When we work in more rural areas, then we call a region, it has a city center, and then they help all the counties in the surrounding area. So with some of our first round of grantees, they've been at this work for about 2 years now, and some of them have already implemented Handle with Care. It's a wonderful program between the police department and the school system. So when a child does go through something traumatic, the police department can alert the school system that they don't give any, explicit information, but it just says, handle with care. This child's been through something. So like Dr. Parker said, if the child overreacts to a teacher asking them to not talk or something, they've been through something, everybody's aware, and probably not a good idea to chastise or discipline the student, but rather send them to the guidance counselor's office. So that's been, and we have 4 different regions that are working on implementing programs like, large scale programs like that. We also have groups, another exciting thing that was fun to see. We're working very closely with Augusta and their medical school, and their medical students were suddenly unable to get their hours because of COVID, right? They couldn't go into the hospitals. So they saw, just like what Jessica was saying, increased need with their teen population in schools. So they used medical students to mentor the teens and start talking about some of these issues. And the innovation and excitement in all of the regions has been very, very exciting. And now that we're working in Metro Atlanta, that just started this past year, it's really exciting to see the differences. In this last round, I don't think Jessica was on the call, but one of our first calls when we were talking to the different regions, it's become a really nice community of learning. And we have one rural partner and then the rest are urban. And we were talking about, I think Gwinnett was talking about working with the school system, and they referenced the population that you serve, Dr. Parker. And our rural partner out of Valdosta said, that's more than I serve in all of my 7 counties. So overall, I think one of the big takeaways I have is it's just been so nice to learn from all the different partners at the table and really get some of these resources out to the masses. And I think that's probably our biggest win.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And Jessica, what about you? Some of the positive impacts that you've seen?
So part of what I love about the fact that the coalition has received this Resilient Gwinnett designation and the financial support to launch all of this in Gwinnett is that Guide has been doing this work for a while. We've been doing suicide prevention and mental health promotion work specifically in Gwinnett County, and so it fits really nicely. And some of my positive impacts are more from some of the stuff that we've been doing that now are feeding into Resilient Gwinnett. One of those things is that we have a fantastic partner with Gwinnett Fire and Emergency Services, and they partnered with us to train every single person who is a part of Gwinnett County Fire and Emergency Services, from the chief down to the front desk people in QPR, in our suicide prevention training, so that the people who are responding to emergency situations in Gwinnett County now are better equipped to recognize some signs if people might be considering suicide, even if that's not why they were called, even if that's not what they're there to address. And in doing that, we were able to teach them, how to get them the right referrals, how to get them the right support. So we've made it this systemic thing. It's not just we trained this handful of people, but we've trained over 1,000 people who are in fire and emergency services, and now have this great partnership that we're working with them to see how do we continue that. We're doing some work with them to train people within their system so that they can, as trainers, so that they can continue to train people, recruits that come through the fire academy and so on and so forth, so that every one of our first responders has this when they go out into the field, just giving them that extra tool in their toolbox. We also have done a lot of training in the last couple of years in the midst of the pandemic. Guide has been doing training for years, and one of the things we really quickly knew that people needed was some self-care stuff. How do we do this? How do we pay attention to ourselves in the middle of our kids are sitting next to us doing virtual learning. We're stressed out about if we're going to have a job, all of these things that were coming at us. And literally hundreds of people have signed up to attend these trainings, just indicating that people realize that we need to address this, that we can't just keep on chugging, keep on going, don't feel it, don't admit it, but that people are actually kind of pausing and saying, I've got to address my own health, my mental health, my emotional health, my spiritual health, and my physical health, so that I can be the best parent, the best teacher, the best youth pastor, whatever role they play. And just the interest in that, and the people that have come back after those workshops with us to say, I learned a technique that I can do in my classroom with my students. I learned, we had some last year, some people who were digital learning, who were teaching students virtually, who learned a couple of things that they could do just to kind of center their students, even though they were staring at them over Zoom instead of face-to-face in a classroom, things that just helped them connect a little bit more. And so we're seeing people want this information. We're seeing people want to infuse this idea of it's okay to talk about that something's hard. It's okay to admit that you might need help with something, and that that kind of shift in attitudes really leads us as a community to a more positive place, because we're not just kind of stuffing those feelings in and not being willing to reach out, but instead we're kind of admitting and recognizing within each other that sometimes we struggle, and so how do we support each other in doing this? So just that community kind of impact from the fire and emergency services to just all the people who have been interested in self-care workshops are getting us to that space where people are a little bit more equipped to start filling that bubble wrap in, as I said earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, because the more you know, the better you can do. And that's just so key. So as we wrap up, we've got about a minute or so left. So from all three of you, for those who are listening in right now, what can they be doing to help, like I said, right now with this issue, as well as long term when we're talking about helping our kids through, adverse experiences?
Well, I'll jump in first and say, get involved in Resilient Gwinnett. ResilientGwinnett.org has all of our information. It links over to Resilient Georgia, so you can find out the bigger picture there as well. At ResilientGwinnett.org, you can sign up to be a partner with us and just find out what's going on. You can sign up to attend one of the trainings that we're currently offering. You can request a custom training for people that you're connected with. There's all kinds of great ways to engage. So I think the best, fastest right now, ResilientGwinnett.org, and connect with us in whatever ways we can help support what you're looking for.
I agree with that. I would also say do a personal inventory or a business inventory of what you have to offer the county, the school district, in terms of support. Not everybody can do everything. The school system certainly cannot do everything, particularly when it's outside in the environment and in the homes of our students. So, and I know we are big. We're 180,000 students strong, but don't let that deter you. There's a school nearby wherever you are, and maybe you start there. Maybe you can provide some support or a resource, or, you can connect with that school and mentor. I would do a personal inventory of yourself and your business to find out, what do I have to offer and provide to help this community issue? And if it is something on a larger scale that you can do, definitely. We are always willing to have conversations and see where that extra support can fit in, because the school and community can't live apart, and the school can't do it alone, and we need our community supporters. So don't be afraid. It is a big task, but you don't have to do it all. Figure out what little piece you can do and commit to that.
Mm-hmm. Start somewhere,
mm-hmm.
but start.
Mm-hmm.
Emily Ann?
I'll just add real quickly, since we have so many folks in the business sector listening, on our webpage on resilientga.org, we have an ACEs prevention flyer that talks a little bit about the return on investment of acting early and the importance of that. And we created that for businesses, for philanthropy, for folks to just understand why prevention is so important, because sometimes it is hard to measure. So I would suggest that. It's on our reports and briefs section. And the other thing I'll mention real quick is, like Jessica said, everybody has been through a traumatic event. We often, and we will be offering at the end of this year, mindful self-compassion courses for adults, which I would strongly recommend to anyone. I took a full day and did the full day version, which we're going to be offering 90-minute versions as well. And it was really helpful because, as you can imagine, talking about childhood trauma can sometimes be draining all day, every day. But I would just encourage that for everyone. We've all been through something really traumatic, and it helps to remind yourself to be compassionate with yourself.
Yep, I love that point. Well, Jessica, Emily, and Dr. Parker, thank you so much for a needed conversation that not only helps our children, but as you just said, Emily, and ourselves as well, because it affects all of us. And to everyone listening, thanks so much for joining us today for the Giving Back to Gwinnett podcast. If you would like to learn more about the Gwinnett Coalition or the Community Foundation, please visit them at gwinnettcoalition.org or cfneg.org. I'm your host, Heather Loveridge. Thanks again for joining us, and now go make a difference in your community.